All right. The last time that we met, we were talking a little bit about how you finally broke the news to your dad, mom, my grandpa Busker, and I guess it was Grace at the time.
My stepmother.
And then how the marriage news also got to grandma and grandpa, and how grandma called you up and asked you, did you or did you not? So we got that already on tape. So now we're going to move forward a little bit. And from that point, what happened? Dad.
Well, Grandma tells me to go see Grandpa, and better tell Grandpa Buskirk that me and Kay's married.
Now, where were you guys at? Where were you living at that time? Was it Bellflower or?
My mother was living in Bellflower.
And Grandma? Where's Grandma at?
My grandma,
No, me, he's talking about
Kay's
me.
father is living in Downey
Okay.
on Paramount.
So anyway, you finally tell Grandma, your mom, what's going on, and from there, what goes on now?
So Grandma tells me to better go tell Kay's dad that we're married, and then go get her stuff and bring her home. And we figured, well, no, we wasn't going to do that. We was going to let Kay finish school before we made any drastic moves. And Grandma says no, she didn't think so. She felt best that we go tell Grandpa Buskirk and then to go get Kay's stuff and bring her home. And I didn't think that was such a good idea. But anyway, we went over and seen Grandpa Buskirk, and we was talking about how we was going to break the news to him. So Kay didn't want to tell him, and I didn't want to tell him. So we get over there, over to her house, and ask her stepmother, Grace, where her dad was, and she said that he was out there in a hammock underneath the shade trees. And so we walked out there, and I said, Mr. Buskirk? And he said, yeah. And I said, me and Kay's got something we'd like to tell you. And he kind of rubs his eyes and sits up and says, yes, what is it? And so I show him our marriage license. And he didn't say anything. He looked kind of amused and said, I think I hear Gracie call me. So he gets up and he walks into the house. And then Kay goes get some of her stuff and we head out.
No, that isn't quite right. I didn't have to go get my stuff. My dear sweet baby sister Nan had everything, had me all packed. I only had all the belongings I owned in the whole world fit in a medium-sized pasteboard box, and it was sitting out on the porch waiting for me. I didn't have to pack myself. She packed for me. And
What did you call Nancy like when you were at Grandma Henriksen's house?
When we first come home, before I seen Dad, she was dancing like she always did and trying to find a bitch. She says, "You're married, aren't you?" And I said, "Well, what do you think?" You know, because she's won't let the cat out of the bag. And she said, "Well, I know you were. I knew you did. You know, all along." And I said, "Did you?" And she said, "Yeah." So when she decided, I mean, she didn't pack my things after we told Dad. She already had them packed because she was so excited because she said, "Now I can finally have a bedroom all to myself. I don't have to share it with you."
So self-motivating.
So self-motivating. And she used to say, when I used to come in from dates late at night, why I was so cold. I mean, I was just freezing, and we didn't have central air or heat in those houses. Our house was a chicken coop, as I've told you many times. And anyway, it was pretty cold in that house, and I used to say, just let me put my feet on you just for a few minutes, just till they get warm. You know, and she was all nice and toasty warm because she'd been sleeping in bed. And so anyway, she said, now I don't have to have you asking me to put your cold feet on me anymore. She says, I'll have my room to myself. And I said, that's fine. And so we left, and then I found out later that she cried all the time because I was gone, that she wanted to be back home, but she would never let me herself tell me that herself. I mean, that came through the grapevine, so as to speak, and when I say the grapevine, I mean Grace told me that Nan was very lonely without me, and said she didn't know why I had to run off and get married like that. And, you know, I thought I was big and I wasn't, you know.
Oh.
So, and anyway, that's how we started off. So we lived with Ray's mom and dad till we got the Mercury paid off. Our 41 Mercury, wasn't it?
Yeah.
41 Mercury paid off. And
How long did that take?
3 months.
So you lived with Grandma Henriksen and Grandpa for 3 months.
Then we got our first mansion. It was one of Paul's shacks, and it was over there. He had about 6 or 7 houses, small houses, that just kind of went around in a
Circle.
yeah, kind of, well, not really a circle, but it was his own property, and they was all right there, one right next door to another, be kind of like how a track would be, only very, very small. But anyway, we rented one of his shacks, and it was just 1 bedroom, 1 bath, and a kitchen and a living room. It was unfurnished, and we really had some really nifty furniture to take with us. We had Raymond's twin-size bed. Him and Ace had twin beds, so
Keep looking.
Grandma let us take that twin bed. So for about the first 2 years of our married life, Ray and I slept in a twin bed, and we had a very, very small 4-drawer dresser, and we had an ice box, not a refrigerator, but an ice box, and we had one of those high-legged stoves in the kitchen. And I don't know where we got our table from. I don't remember where we got our table from, but we did have a table and 2 chairs in the kitchen, and that was the extent of our furniture. We didn't have anything in the living room at all. No living room furniture whatsoever. That came later. And anyway, we used to have to get ice every other day. We used to have a card that had corners. You put the corner of how much you wanted. You either got 25, 50, 75, or 100 pounds of ice, and then you put up that corner what you wanted. And our refrigerator was small, so it wouldn't take any more than 50 pounds of the 50-pound cube of ice. Most of the time we got 25 and made do because we were poor. And of course the water would drip out the bottom, and you'd have a pan underneath that refrigerator to collect the water. And because we didn't have an ice box at home, we had a refrigerator, so I never could remember to empty that darn thing. So I mopped my floors every day whether I wanted to or not, because that pan ran over all the time. So that was our furniture and starting out. The house was very, very, very dirty when we moved into it. There had been some Mexicans living in it, and anyway, it was pretty dirty. It took a lot to get it cleaned up, but we finally got it cleaned up and livable, I guess you could say, as livable as we could. My sister Flo lived in one of Paul's shacks, houses. My sister Mary and her husband Everett lived in one. And so the 3 of us was there kind of together. And that's where we lived for, I guess, almost 2 years, I think. We was there, wasn't we? I think somewhere around there, maybe 1.5 years, 2 years, something like that.
Okay.
And
We stayed there until we pulled all those clotheslines down and ripped it off with the bumper, and he decided we ought to get out of there by then.
I'm not sure. I think you've already told that story.
Okay.
I
Didn't they?
don't know. I don't remember it at all.
Oh, well,
What?
it gets better every time he tells it.
Oh,
so
good. All right.
we'll let him go ahead and tell it, because it gets better each and every time he tells it, and he loves to tell it.
All right, let's hear it.
Okay, we was coming from behind the house where we had the car parked, and he drove around the neighbor's yard, which he had a clothesline. Back in them days, they had clotheslines instead of dryers, and they pinned their clothes on this wire type thing. So they call them clotheslines. And as this neighbor was pinning the clotheslines, his clothes on the clotheslines, okay, come along and hits it and drags onto it and heads on down the street, and didn't give it one thought to slow down. She kept right on it going, and his clothes were just flying behind the car. Ripped on down the street, going as fast as he could.
Was you in La La Land, or do you deny all this?
Now that he's told, that's his side of the story.
Oh, okay, let's hear
Now
it.
let me give you
The reality?
I'll give you the reality version of it. Yes, I did hit his clothesline, but I mean, I barely tapped it, and I didn't knock it down, nor did I drag his clothes down the street with me. But he likes to tell everybody that he had those clothespins in his mouth, hanging up those clothes and that. And I come along and swished it, and he was trying to run after me with those clothespins in his mouth, trying to get those clothes back.
Well, Well, maybe somewhere in the middle, because it sounds like he was ready for you guys to leave.
No, it's just like I said.
Yeah.
Grandpa likes to tell two stories about my driving. Well, yeah, I guess two. The other one was when we lived in another apartment soon after we left there. And that had a real long driveway and you had to back out of it. And I guess I'm like, is it Miranda that doesn't back up very well?
Oh, she's terrible.
Well, I guess I was probably like her. I was 15 years old, just learning to drive. But anyway, out at the end of the driveway, they had these two great big cement pillar-like type things on each side of the driveway. Well, I guess I was backing out, and I can't remember. I think I was late for work, and I was going a little bit too fast, probably for my skill in driving. But anyway, I hit the one pillar on the driver's side, and I didn't stop then. I kept going. Like I said, I think I was late for work, and I kept going. When I came home, I looked at that, and Grandpa looked at it, and the bumper had just pointed straight out. It
Been an L shape.
And he never let me get that one either, you know.
You had worse luck with driving, because I know this for a fact. When I was a kid, you drove the Chrysler right over into the miner's backyard. Remember that one?
Yeah, but that wasn't my fault. The brakes went out on that. There was no
Sure,
brakes.
Yeah, heard it all before.
There was no brakes. There really wasn't. Even Dad admitted to that one. Yes, don't you remember the miners peering out their window like they thought I went nuts or something?
And I also remember when you got that 57 Ford on the way to Utah one time, Grandpa tells you, cut it in! When you tried to pass that truck, you remember that?
No, that wasn't Grandpa Henriksen, not my way to Utah. That was going back to Indiana, and that was my dad.
No, I'm talking about, well, go ahead with that story. Go ahead.
Well, my dad, he was, Flo and I was driving back to Indiana. We had little Bill with us, and we was taking my dad back, and we had his 41 Plymouth. And anyway, he just had a new motor put in it. And back in those days, you had to break your motors in. You had to drive like 30 miles an hour for so many hundred miles, then you could finally up it to 40 and then finally 50, but you had to get so many miles on it. Well, we was driving and it just felt like we wasn't going anywhere. I mean, it just felt like we wasn't going anywhere. And so Dad was snoring logs back in the back seat laying down, and Flo and I kind of looked at each other, and I said, Daddy's asleep, isn't he? And she says, yeah, he's snoring back there. And I said, well, I wonder if we ought to just creep this up a little bit. What could it hurt? You know, I said, don't you feel like you can get out and run as fast as this car's going? And she said, yeah, kind of. And so anyway, I started pushing on it a little bit and driving a little bit faster. And
Well, how much is pushing it a little bit? What'd you get up to?
I don't know, maybe 50, 55, something like that. And I was driving along, and all of a sudden, my dad was, he was a smoker, but he wasn't an inhaler. I never saw my dad inhale cigarettes, but he'd always light them and hold them in his mouth, and he'd bob that cigarette up and down. I think it was more a nervous habit than anything else, but anyway, he got up and he lit that cigarette, and he says, you girls thought I was sleeping, didn't you? But he says, I knew how fast you was going. And I said, yeah, I guess, yeah, I did go a little bit faster. Well, by this time I was passing this, one of these big diesel trucks that has big long trailers on it. And it was a 2-lane highway, old Route 66, and there's only two lanes on it. And there was another vehicle coming towards me. And anyway, my dad looked at that and saw that, and he says, cut her in, Kay, cut her in. He says, that guy's going to hit you. And I said, well, Dad, I can't. I'm not past the truck yet. I'll cave in the middle of him, He says, I'd rather have a bent-up fender than a head-on collision. But anyway, I didn't cut her in until I got around the truck, but it was just barely made it. I mean, just barely made it, Charlie.
So, going from there, you had another experience driving. You said Dad taught you to drive?
Yeah, he taught me how to drive, but mainly it was just before probably we got married, and then after I got married. I mean, I hadn't been driving very, very long. And he took me over on this street called Clark, and it was a 6-lane highway, 3 lanes on each side. And first time he had me driving, he had me make a U-turn. I said, well, I don't think I can make it. He said,
It's a 8-lane highway.
He said, for heaven's sakes, Kate, it's 6 lanes and there's no cars coming. What is there not to make? But that looked awful scary for me. I was used to just going straight down the road and doing nothing else. And when he told me to stop, make a U-turn so we could go back, I thought that was pretty scary. And I thought, oh my gosh, you know, can I do this? But I was kind of able to do it, I guess. But yeah, that's when he taught me to drive, was over there on Clark Street, and I hadn't been driving very long when we was married, maybe just a few weeks, not very long at all.
Do you remember we used to go up there on Century? Or do you remember?
I don't remember too much about that.
Anyway, it sounds like you hit a preacher's car. Tell them about that.
Oh, well, that was my first accident. That was before.
Those others.
That was before Aldo or my dad. Well, actually, my dad was before we got married. But anyway, with the preacher's car, Dad and I had only been married probably for a couple weeks, and I was so thrilled because he left that 41 Mercury and told me I could have it for the day, and he got a ride to work, and he said that you know, that way I'd have a way to get to Flo's, because I was kind of uncomfortable staying with Grandma and being newlywed and not knowing her very well, and I just, you know, didn't feel comfortable over there, so I'd go over and stay with my sister Flo until Dad would come home from work, and then he'd either stop and pick me up or Flo would give me a ride or whatever. But this day I had my own car, so I was so thrilled about it. And like I said, I hadn't been driving very long, and I went to turn the corner, and I guess I took the corner too fast, and there was a nice big shiny black Buick, and anyway, my bumper nicked that guy's car. Didn't hurt it all that bad, but kind of scraped the paint, a little bit of the paint off, and he jumped out of that car, and he was so mad, and come to find out he was a minister. And you would have thought that I totaled out his car the way he was carrying on. And back then we didn't have to have insurance, and I had no driver's license because I had never got one yet. That's another story. But anyway, you know, I went home, told Dad about it, and didn't you call the guy up and get something worked out? I think we had to give him $100 or something, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I think he said, well, I'll settle for $100 if you give me $100. So that kind of put us behind a little bit. So
$100 back in them day was a lot, wasn't it?
that was like 2 weeks worth of work. Like you'd have to work for 2 weeks to. Dad made $50 a week back then, so that was like 2 weeks of work. So.
All right. So from the Paul Shack, let's move on from there. Where'd you guys go next?
Well, we had a couple of apartments that we rented in between time. One where, well, I guess I told that off camera about the bumper, didn't I? About bending that bumper on that. Was that on camera?
Yeah,
was that off?
Uh-huh.
And we lived there for a little while, and that was kind of funny because Dad and I was married in 1948, and it wasn't that year, that Thanksgiving, but it was the following Thanksgiving. So we'd been married approximately a year and a half, and we was living in this apartment where I told you about bending that bumper back. But anyway, Grandma and Grandpa had invited us over for Thanksgiving dinner, and I was real sick. I had a strep throat, a real bad strep throat, and I didn't want to go, so Dad said he would go. And without me, and he says, I'll bring you back a plate, something for you to eat. Well, that didn't sound good at all because I was really, really sick. But anyway, he went over to his mom and dad's, and he had Thanksgiving dinner. When he came home, Grandma had sent a whole baked chicken with him, and then plus she made me a plate with, you know, the other side dishes that they'd had that day. And anyway, when she made that, why sent it home, we had this dog named Shribbles. And Shribbles,
was that a Labrador?
that was what kind of dog was Shribbles, honey?
She was a lab.
But anyway, I gave that dog to Dad when before we was married, so he had that dog. So of course Grandma gave it politely back to us after we got our own place. And but anyway, I was so sick I didn't want to get out of bed, so Dad decided he'd take a nap, and he got into bed with me and was laying down. Well, while we was sleeping, Shribbles climbed up on the table, and she got that whole chicken and the other stuff that Grandma had sent home, and she had a nice Thanksgiving dinner, and
You did not.
and I did not. So that took care of that Thanksgiving. But actually, that's the only Thanksgiving dinner I got by without cooking for, because the first year Grandma had it, then that second year I was sick, then after that, from third year on, I fixed all Thanksgiving and Christmas dinners for Dad's family, clear up until
Last year. Isn't that right?
well.
In essence?
Well, I mean, that's for my family, but I'm talking about the Henriksens.
Yeah.
I, from the time until everybody moved, when we left Utah, that's when it stopped. When I moved to Vegas, then of course I just fixed for my own family. But up until that point, I fixed the whole dinner for everybody, you know.
Yeah.
I used to ask Karen and Lou every once in a while to bring, maybe they could bring it because they made real good lemon pies and I did not, and that was all the Henriksen favorite. And I'd sometimes ask them if they'd like to maybe bring a lemon pie or something. I'd fix everything else, and they'd say yeah. But then when it came time, first year they let me down. They said, "Oh, I forgot all about you. Asked me to do that," and so I never trusted them that they. I mean, I was always afraid they'd let me down, so I never asked them to bring anything